You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Barbell Logic podcast, the Beast Overburden series. I'm your host, Niki Sims, strength and nutrition coach at Barbell Logic and also the chief experience officer, joined by the one and only Andrew Jackson. He's our chief operations officer and also a strength and nutrition coach at Barbell Logic. And he's also the product manager of our software that he's been developing. So many hats, many hats. Welcome.
Good morning.
Man, we had one heck of a weekend. We survived. We are survivors of Hurricane Hillary.
Hurricane Hillary. Oh, yeah.
How was it for you? What was your opinion being from the Pacific Northwest to come down here and endure this storm with us?
Oh, wow. It was sort of like an average September, October rainy day. Sort of what I would compare it to.
Just another day for you.
You guys are pretty dramatic down here.
Oh, yeah. We're definitely very dramatic.
I noticed when we were walking by Lululemon, they had like 3 sandbags laid out in front of the front door, just in case things got real.
Like, are those for a group workout or is that for the storm? What's going on there?
Yeah, it was that's pretty mild.
Yeah, a lot of news, a lot of warnings, but it ended up being a lot of rain. I think the biggest negative impact has been the frizziness to my hair and how humid it is in this house.
Yeah. Humidity is very uncomfortable.
You're not equipped for this.
Although all of our listeners in Houston that have been at 90+% humidity and over 100 degrees for the last 2 months, I think, are not feeling sympathy for any amount of humidity or heat.
My brother lives in North Carolina where they've also been hundreds and humidity, just brutal. So yeah, we're getting by here in California. It's been tough, but we're going to make it. Survivor. Really interesting topic today that I'm pretty excited to talk about. It's a really important theme that comes up for me. I think it's come up for you, and we see it a lot in our clients. And the way it comes up, as it often does, is when clients are sharing with us what they want to achieve with their coaching, and really in this season of life, as we'll call it. That phrase usually sounds like, I want to get stronger and I want to lose weight. Or I want to improve my strength and lose body fat. Or I want to change my body composition and get stronger. So many different ways of saying that they want to make a change. How would you summarize what you're hearing with those goal statements?
I would say that is the most common goal that I see on the questionnaires when they come through. I can't think of a single person who has said, I want to gain as much weight as possible in order to support my strength goals. It's always some version of leaning out while gaining strength or building muscle and also leaning out. And I think that's something I related to a long time ago before I started training. And even now, I mean, to some degree, I also don't want to, like we talked about a couple episodes ago, I don't want to just blow it out to pursue numbers at all costs. I think what I felt when I would say something like that, or when new clients say something like that, they're looking to change, and they, in their ideal state, would like to have more muscle mass and less body fat. I think that's understandable.
Totally.
I think where it starts to get more tricky to understand or to tease out the real goal or message there is that they'll often, in describing that, want to do both simultaneously, or they'll say, I want to recomposition, or I want to build mass and lose body fat simultaneously. So I think trying to make sure and understand where they're coming from is really important, so that your coaching, which is not just the X's and O's of writing the programming, I think a lot of it is how you level set expectations and provide guidance and a good framework for how to think about their training and how to think about how their body's going to be changing over time so that they can reach their goals.
And you also have to, I think, get really clear on what that means for the person. Do they have a vision of in their head of maybe what they looked like in high school? Or do they have this maybe somewhat idyllic state where they've gained 50 pounds of lean muscle and they're super fast and they're agile and they've doubled all their 1RMs and they never had to, gain fat to get there? Or does it mean that they've lost 50 pounds or lost 10 pounds and all of their lifts have gone up? So I think during that initial on-ramp period where we're on the call or going back and forth on the workouts, like flesh that goal out for me. Like, what does getting stronger mean for you? What does that equate to? Is it being able to lift a certain amount? And what does changing your body composition mean to you? Do you want to see certain muscles stand out? Do you want to fit into a certain size? Are you trying to lose body fat? We have to get a little more specific because otherwise it's hard to really chase like two competing goals of losing weight and gaining muscle, because muscle is mass. So maybe it means to show more muscle more than anything. And the thing that comes up, and we've been doing this for a couple of our products, is client journey mapping. That's a really useful tool in client experience. And we go through what a person is experiencing, specifically what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're saying, what they're doing to get their needs met across various stages of a journey as it really would pertain to your brand. So I also like to think of it as a journey in some sort of mission. So we could do a journey for this mission of starting at whatever point there are in their lives to becoming this dream outcome of losing fat and gaining muscle. And makes me really wonder, like, what are the phases that entails and how long of a time frame is that? What are the trade-offs that they have to make? Where are the points where they're going to wonder, is this even worth it? Or what are the metrics that we use to make sure we're moving in the right direction? What do you think about that? Like, what comes to mind for you when we think about it like a journey?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me that you just touched on there is the time frame aspect of things. That part of the challenge with having the conversation with a client is that most people are able to think about maybe a week or a month or maybe a 3-month challenge is often what you'll see with the fitness world. That's sort of the longest amount of time that you see things talked about with respect to being on a diet or being on a program. It's very rare that you have somebody who's ready to think about committing to a process or a journey that's 6 months or a year or maybe even 2, 3+ years. We've both been training for 10 years. I've been competing and doing some sort of a sport or competition or fitness activity for my entire life. And all of those activities have contributed to some extent to physical changes that show today. So that's really the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of setting expectations with a client is the time horizon.
Yeah.
And realistically, 6 to 12 months is what it's going to take before you're seeing real significant change, unless you have somebody coming from an extreme situation. If somebody is significantly underweight and they make a big change to add calories and resistance training, or if somebody is significantly overweight and they change their physical activity level and reduce their caloric intake, you might see some faster changes, arguably, maybe less sustainable than making slower changes, but time frame's the first. And the other, if I were to really map out the long-term journey for being able to change your body composition, certainly we talk about strength training and barbell training as a foundation, just going to assume that that's going to be part of this journey as strength coaches at a company called Barbell Logic.
Yeah.
But really, that long-term journey in my mind, as I'm trying to think about how I want to try to coach a client, is on the nutrition side of things. And that the ideal state down the road is not some fixed point of body composition in a short period of time or short-term change perspective. It's a ability to change their body composition up or down, or whichever way they want to go, because they have a grasp of consistent training. They've built a habit of consistent training and have developed skills to be able to manage their nutrition to support whichever goals they have, and have a baseline set of habits that can sustain that behavior long enough to actually get the results that they're looking for.
So let's get specific and talk about what the differences would be between some people who you just mentioned and what you would do for their training and their nutrition. So taking a look, I actually pulled up our collection of client intake forms where clients give us a lot of information, or they give it to their coach about what they want to achieve when they start working with the coach and where they're coming from. So age, weight, goals, training history. And I can say that most of our clients are between the ages, most of them, we have some on the other end, but between ages 29 and 44, mostly male, and around the sub 200 weight category, or maybe just a little bit over 200. And that's an interesting weight because I think 200 is, I think for many men, too heavy, or it's either the beginning of a strong weight. Like they need to get to 200 to demonstrate that they're strong, or it's too much. Like 190 seems to be like the sweet spot that if a guy weighs over 190, he is too big. So interesting kind of categorization there of weights. But let's pick maybe 2 or 3 client types and go through what that journey might look like for them. So I would say the younger, maybe early 30s, weighing $165, who wants to gain strength and probably look like they lift. But I would suspect they have maybe some fear around getting too big, you know? So that's one idea for a client type. And then what's another one you'd like to take through a journey?
The other is probably that mid 30s to mid 40s, floating around 200 plus or minus 5 pounds. They know they want to get stronger, but there's some fear around getting fat often is what I hear. Or, they'll say bigger, but it's that they don't want to get a bunch of excess body fat just because they're trying to get stronger. And
Totally.
And associate this image of lifting with being a power lifter, which has, depending on what your understanding of powerlifting is, a lot of times there's some bigger guys.
Yes.
I think leaner body weight powerlifters, celebrity powerlifters, or strength athletes are becoming more common to see now. But certainly the kind of stereotypical powerlifter is a big
in an equipped
person.
Shirt with like a big bald head that's purpley red, and like the belt that's squeezed really, really tight over a big belly. Like, because those guys tend to lift the most weight.
Right.
Up until recently, now we're seeing leaner guys lift a lot of weight too. But yeah, I think that easily enters the thoughts and immediately triggers like that what you just said, that fear of like, I do not want that. If that's what powerlifting and getting strong is, I do not want that.
Or sometimes it's even that they want to build muscle, but they don't want to feel heavy. And I can actually relate to this because I remember, especially when I was into running and cycling, mountain biking, which I have a lot of clients that are into sports where body weight makes a difference, and feeling heavy is definitely not fun when you're trying to bike up a hill with all your buddies that are 140 pounds and you're the 180, 200 pound guy going up the hill. It's not fun.
I can only imagine. That would be really hard.
Yeah. A lot of the guys that I talk to that are in that bucket, in the 180 to 200 range, are also trying to balance goals where extra weight gain is a disadvantage to their sport. So that's kind of the category 2 that I work with a lot.
I would also love to do a journey with a female who we usually work with females who are in their 30s, oftentimes are just about to have children or have just had children. And they also want to be strong. And some of them, say, I want to have muscle, I want to be strong. And that tends to be really also linked with not wanting to gain weight. Like they want to lean out. They want to get strong and lean out at the same time. And so that's an interesting coupling of goals there that takes a lot of expectation management. So my proposal is let's do a bit of an empathy map, and let's run through the whole journey for one client type at a time so that we can take them from beginning to end and see what it's like. So we'll do an empathy map. I'll tell you what it is in a second. And then we'll do a client journey where we talk about the different phases that they might go through, what the peaks and valleys are along the way, and what it's like to get to that end goal. So client number one, maybe we should give him a name. What was our most frequent client name? We did this at the block party. Was it John? It's probably some J name.
Probably. Yeah, good, safe bet there.
So John, let's really turn him into a person. He's 30 years old. He's 5'10", which he rounds up to 6 foot. He is 170 pounds. He played basketball in school, does, weekend activities with his friends. He's dabbled in some gym time, but, now he knows, he's got a job that can support his coaching. He wants to actually invest in something like this, and he wants to gain strength, get strong, and I'll say add muscle without getting fat would be a summarized goal. So an empathy map, and we've been doing these together recently, is where we think about this client and we guess the things that they're thinking and feeling based on the things that they say that they've told us, or maybe they even type into their internet browsers, and the things that they do. So the podcasts they listen to, the articles that they read, the businesses they search, the things that they do to get their needs met. So if John says, I want to get strong and I want to have muscle and I don't want to be fat though, what do you think he's feeling and thinking with those goals?
I think he's optimistic and excited about being able to be more physically powerful and strong and useful in his day-to-day life.
Yeah.
While also having some fear, anxiousness around being, like I was saying earlier, that the extra body weight would either be detrimental to the other things that he really likes to do, or body weight numbers that he's associated with not feeling good in the past. Sometimes a guy like John will have come down from feeling heavy and associate 200 pounds with that discomfort and not want to go back to that. So it's uncertainty about how to balance those goals.
Yeah. So there's excitement there, there's readiness, but there's also uncertainty. And, there's, as much as I think people have something in their mind that they really want, they also might have something in their mind that they really don't want. And they need, more of an expert to help guide them to make sure they're moving towards what they want and not end up looking like powerlifter. So John does a bunch of research, starts listening to the podcast. He goes down the bio lane, Instagram, vortex. He gets into Renaissance periodization. Maybe he downloads the Strong Lifts 5x5 and he starts there, and then he only weighs 170 pounds, so he probably hurts himself. And then he hires a coach. How do you think we should lay out the phases that would be important for him along the way? What might they look like?
A lot of those guys initially that I work with, those examples you just gave were perfect because they've probably been trying to do too much, or they've been applying too much stress without enough protein or calories to support recovery. So they're underinvesting in recovery and overinvesting in the stress. And
that's a great way to put it.
I was one of those as well, where was doing CrossFit too much and under eating with Paleo Zone at one of the recomposition block amounts that was under 2,000 calories. So whether or not they get hurt, not sure, but they're often just stuck well before they should be stuck or could be stuck because they're not balancing those aspects of the training process very well.
Yeah. Sounds like they're trying to get both things out once.
Right. And speaking of Lane Norton, the classic analogy that he'll say is when you try to chase two rabbits, you catch none.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great kind of visual for what a guy like that is probably experiencing.
Yeah.
Just not really accomplishing any of the goals other than feeling like, man, I'm working really hard, but can't figure out why I'm not really progressing.
Right. Yeah. I think what I would love to do with that guy would be to get him, lifting heavy, teach him how to lift heavy really well without it needing to be a ton of volume, but see weights on the bar go up in a really simple program, nothing special here. And like you were talking about a little while ago, is how can we guide his nutrition so that he's taking in what he needs to perform well in the gym and then to recover afterwards so that we can stay in that muscle building phase for a long time, as long as we can, but without it turning into a bunch of fluff, because it seems like that's what would kind of scare him off.
Right. And two things that I would prioritize are true for all three of the journeys that we're going to be talking about. That, like you said, prioritizing strength as an objective measure of progress is really useful. I've got some thoughts on how to balance that long term, but certainly as a near term metric, to define strength as the ability to produce force as measured objectively with weight going up on the bar, and use that as a metric to evaluate progress is really useful, because you can get stronger, you can lift more weight, regardless of what you're doing with your body composition. There's limits to that, of course. If you lose, after a certain point, losing weight is going to start to impair that. But whether you're, well, certainly for John in this case, as somebody who's trying to build muscle mass, using weight going up on the bar and strength is going to be a great indicator that his training and his recovery are balanced. And then in terms of balancing the recovery, as we've talked about many, many times, starting off with making sure they're getting enough protein is going to be objective number one, to consistently get enough protein to actually be able to facilitate muscle protein synthesis. And then beyond that, managing your total calories so that there's going to probably be some amount of weight gain. But if he's eating relatively consistently and tracking his weight and waist, then he'll be able to evaluate that rate of change over time as well and keep that triangulated. So you're balancing, I would say, 3 or 4 variables there, depending on how much you want to include the waist. But weight on the bar going up, amount of protein going in, and weight on the scale going up at, something like somewhere between a quarter to, at the high end, a pound of body weight per week is probably going to support his goals. Probably quarter to half a pound on, averaged out over a week is going to be the slower, obviously, is going to be less fat gain, and the faster is going to be a little bit more fat gain. So, and obviously, if he's getting nutrition coaching, it's a lot easier to provide that day-to-day direction. But at a high level, we've talked about in the past protein targets that he could aim for. It's probably going to be something between 120 and 150 grams, probably closer to 150 grams of protein per day. And then trying to manage your total calories so that the weight gain's not too fast. And that sort of ties back into what I was talking about earlier, where I want to prioritize on his journey, working with him to figure out how to incrementally add or subtract calories in a way that is not super restrictive and sustainable, so that he can make those choices consistently over a long period of time. Like the calorie increase that you just did a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, was 150, 200 calories, something like that.
Closer to 300. Yeah.
300 calories. Still, 300 calories is not a significant amount of calories, right? That's like one beer, depending on the beer you drink, or a glass or two of milk, right? So that, I think, is one of the coaching dynamics that I think is important to work through, is that we're not trying to make changes where you go to a gallon of milk a day. It's might be one glass of milk per meal kind of a change, or one handful less of nuts in your snack, kind of a change.
Right.
And then be able to cobble together either adding or subtracting choices like that to change the direction of the scale consistently over a long period of time.
Consistently. Yeah. You mentioned this at another point when we were talking, where maybe one of the biggest changes there is that you're helping him be consistent with those calories more than anything.
Right.
I think people who that's just a huge starting point in general, is because most people don't, eat exactly the same thing every day. And if they do eat that, then they probably know how many calories they're getting. But often, we'll see days during the week where it's super low caloric intake. And then that leads to, really hungry days later in the week. So it's all over the place. And then there's traveling thrown in, there's partying thrown in. So, calories are just totally swinging, which definitely influences how much energy you have for your training, what your recovery is like, and if you're going to be gaining or losing over a long period of time. So now you're making that hugely important source of energy for training consistent, so that you can have much more control over what it's turning into when training is actually occurring.
Right. And I would put that consistency at a higher priority than precision. And a lot of people get hung up about how many grams this, how many grams that. The reality is that the precision of those measurements, even on packaged labels, is so low or inaccurate that you're going to have a hard time truly controlling the number of macros that you're getting at that level of detail. I mean, we'll have people that are sweating over missing their target by a gram or two, when really the more important thing is having that foundation of consistently eating roughly the same foods. And this is another reason why we like to steer people towards whole foods, is because it's easier to be more consistent. There's less variation in the undercover macros, with fat kind of sneaking in there unless you start adding a bunch of oil. But in general, having whole foods and less processed foods is going to be a little bit easier to be consistent. But again, there's all trade-offs. I think one of the other pieces that's important from the setting expectations perspective in coaching this person through their journey is working with them to make sure that we're on the same page about how big of a priority this is, because at some point it's hard to do and it takes a lot of energy and effort. So the amount of energy and time that you have to manage the change is going to influence your ability to dial in those details. So when I'm talking about trying to manage weight gain at a quarter to a half a pound a week, you're going to have to be pretty dang consistent.
Yeah.
And if you're at a stage of life where you can't keep a lot of consistency, then I think an important conversation is to level set on expectations that this might not be the right time to be trying to worry about that level of detail, because there's going to be fluctuations in your day-to-day ability to even make the choices that you want to make.
It kind of sounds like at this early phase, there's a lot being done to create some really important habits in nutrition, where that's almost harder work than the physical aspect of it.
For sure it is.
Where lifting, we're not approaching their genetic potential. I mean, we're approaching it, but we're not close to it.
Right.
They haven't learned yet how strong they are. They're far away from it. And it still requires effort. But the hardest part of their training, I think, at that point is learning how to eat and how to, work this into their schedule, like you were just talking about, what food choices to make, where they're investing all that energy, but they aren't seeing, their jacked body yet. And it's going to take a long time to get there. So physical output.
It takes a lot of faith. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of faith. Yeah. So that's why.
Trust in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. Laying it out where it's going to take, a year, and helping them see what these 3, 4, 6 month chunks might look like is so important, or else it's hard to feel like what you're doing is worth it in the beginning. And that's why I think people want to do a lot of training right out of the gate. It's because they want to get there as fast as they can without creating those nutrition habits that are really going to just totally drive them to success later in their journey.
Right.
So let's say, we've gotten him through 5 months. He's gained weight. He's done a really good job training. His training is much harder now. Weights on the bar are a lot heavier. He's definitely squatting the 200s for a lot of reps. He's pulling in the threes. Training days are taking longer. We're at that point now where it's like, squeezing out the newbie gains, and things are getting a bit more complex. He's needing maybe a bit more precision. And now he's maybe even feeling like, shoot, I've gotten heavy and training's hard. What happens now? Like, I think that's a big phase one. What does that next phase kind of look like?
That's a really interesting transition point and part of the journey where I think focusing on strength too much early on can start to become detrimental psychologically. Because if your identity gets wrapped around the weight going up on the bar all the time, every session, especially early on, or maybe every other session, or then it starts to slow down every other week. And I've had clients like that where they're able to lock in again for maybe 3, maybe 6 months, and you can drive them up a pretty solid linear progression with minimum effective dose changes into kind of that early or intermediate stage where at least once a week that you're setting a PR on some sort of a 3, 5, or 1 RM. And then they kind of hit that wall where they made some of those changes where they increased their calories, they got better, their protein dialed in, and now, to your point, they're kind of redlining on the weights, and the only lever they know how to pull is more calories, and their pants are starting to get a little bit tight, and they're just not sure this is who they want to be. Like, this is that, the fear starts to kick back up that, oh man, I bought into this, and now I feel like I'm on the verge of being that version of myself that I didn't want to be. And
I wonder if this is where we hear that, I just got back from vacation and I was thinking I really want to add in some conditioning.
Hypertrophy, I want to switch into something different. And like you said, yes, it often happens after or leading up to the beach vacation in the summer where they start putting on the swimsuit that they hadn't put on in a while. And it's like, this is a little...
Yeah, this is different.
This is different. That's, like I said, where the somewhat goalpost needs to change a little bit, because up until that point, we were using strength and objectively weight on the bar as a proxy for reinforcing the positive habit of training, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. And that's not to say that strength and weight can't keep going up on the bar over a long period of time. It's just that I think it's important during that first 3 to 6 months, and then obviously, especially at that transition point, that you start working together as a coach and client to identify metrics that are still reinforcing the habit of training and the process of lifting heavy weights over a long period of time that can be subjective and objective measures of progress that kind of help diffuse that identity, or to at least include other elements of a strength training identity that are more than just PRs going up every single week. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this is huge, like for a strength coach to hear and know how to deal with, and for a client, like you were saying, to hear, to be like, well, I thought the whole point of this was to get, 5 pounds more on the bar. Like, I thought everything I was supposed to be doing was to get more weight on the bar. And even as a coach, you're like, well, I have to program however I have to program to get a new PR. And, we developed our app like that. So we get to see every PR and track it all the time. And now what you're saying is like, let's tone down the importance of that driving factor, which is like, that's different.
To some extent. I mean, like I said, it's still something that I want to see. I have clients that are still hitting PRs 6, 7 years down the road. And I'm not saying don't hit PRs. I'm not saying PRs don't matter. I still want to hit PRs. I just want to broaden the range of things that we can count as PRs. And it's one of the things that I think is actually a huge benefit of the app that we use, is that we can see all of the different rep ranges as PRs. We can see tonnage fluctuating over time. We can see consistency, how frequent they're training and how consistent they're able to get their training done. So these are all metrics that I think...
How good their lifts look.
Yeah, the skill of their lift.
Skill development.
the bar speed at an equivalent weight. I was actually just talking to a client who fits this category pretty well, actually, last week. And he was kind of down on himself because last week we had to give him a low stress week because he was finally starting to approach that genetic potential, at least where he's at right now. Not his full genetic potential, but like the weights are starting to get grindy. And he has a whole bunch of work stuff coming up, and he was kind of single parent for a week. His wife is out of town, and his shoulder starts bugging him, and things just kind of got to a point where I said, okay, hey, next week, let's back off a little bit. And he was beating himself up about that, but I was able to pull up on the app and show, hey, this low stress week, quote unquote, was your PR 6 weeks ago.
That's so cool.
And so that's as much of a sign of progress and strength.
Totally.
Being stronger, even though it's not a lifetime PR, the relative difficulty of a weight that was a PR 6 weeks ago is much lower.
Yeah.
I would say he's stronger for sure, even though he didn't hit a PR that day.
That's wonderful to be able to see it that way. It's so important, or else you have that, you associate with, we need to back off with, oh no, like that's not going to be enough. I'm not going towards my goals anymore. I'm giving up. When really sometimes the right minimum effective dose change is less to keep going in the direction where you want to go.
Right. And so, for somebody like that, when they hit that phase, then that's actually another big point where I'll commonly hear that recomposition question. Hey, can we keep adding muscle and lose body fat? I'd like to kind of trim down a little bit.
Can we do that?
For somebody at that phase, it's going to be tough. But I do think, like I said, he can continue to get stronger and probably look like he's put more muscle mass on, because as he loses body fat and continues to strength train, it implies that he's reducing his calories, ideally slowly. Just like with the weight gain being very gradual, we would want the weight loss to be very gradual. I had a guy in this actual exact category. He typically floats around 92 to 95 kilos. So he's right around that 200-pound point.
Okay.
And he really wanted to see how lean he could get by DEXA scan measurement. So he took a DEXA scan, and then he wanted to do a weight cut and evaluate his lean body mass and body fat at the end of this. I think it was like 8 weeks he wanted to do it. And he targeted 0.5 pound of weight loss per week. And he definitely leaned out. He looked more jacked. But then when he did his DEXA scan, he noticed that he lost some lean body mass. And his strength kind of held steady. Like he lost a little bit of strength in some of his pressing movements. But his reflection after seeing the DEXA scan results was next time he would try to do a slower weight loss. So he would try to do 1/4 pound a week, 1/4 pound instead of 0.5 pound, to see if he could mitigate the muscle mass loss. So from my, N equals probably a dozen or 6 people, which is not a formal controlled study by any means, guys in that kind of weight range where they're in that, 180 to 200 pound range, when they try to lean out, they look and feel better, but there is going to be trade-off in that they're probably going to lose a little bit of muscle mass along the way. And then strength is going to vary depending on a lot of different things, which lift and how aggressive they cut, etc. But might be able to squeeze out still some strength progress, but a lot of that's going to come down to how carefully they control the cut.
It sounds like if you have your expectations set and think of it and lay out these long chunks of time, that he can still reach his initial goal of, I want to get stronger and not get overweight. And it seems like you can really work together, guiding him along that journey with the right expectations and nutrition. And you have to really, as the coach, kind of be ahead of where they're about to be in their journey, where you're like, okay, we're closing in on the end of this beginner phase here. He's probably going to start to feel this way. I need to broaden the horizons on what a PR looks like.
Right.
And kind of set the schedule for the next couple months that might be coming up.
Yeah, I think that's a huge aspect of coaching that we were just talking about last week We met as a team with a bunch of our coaches talking about what clients want from their training. And Becca was sharing how she prioritizes how to help frame their clients' training so that they can understand what it is that they're doing, where they're going, and keep a good handle on reality. Where a client might be so hunkered down into the individual training session or how they're feeling in that moment when they're filling out the workout, and lose sight of how far they've come and where they're going and how it all kind of fits together.
What their priorities are.
How they balance their priorities. And that's such a crucial aspect of both training as a client and then coaching your clients, because as we've said multiple times now, these changes take so long that being present in the moment with your training while keeping the big picture in mind and making changes that you can consistently sustain rather than reacting to the moment and trying to make this big change or that big change, kind of chasing multiple rabbits kind of a situation.
Yep.
Because that's when you stop making progress. So I think framing your training within the context of that bigger picture is critical.
So I think we're going to leave John for now, taking him from gaining some weight, gaining muscle, and then through a phase where he might want a recomposition. Next week, we're going to come back and talk about someone who's starting maybe with Barbell Logic a bit heavier. Goals are a little bit different. And we're also going to walk through a journey of one of our female clients who also wants to get strong and the thoughts and emotions that come up with that journey. So thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for listening to the Barbell Logic podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a share, give us a review, and we'll see you here next week.